Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 85th edition of the Power Dialogue. Please, I want to thank you. All right. My name is Emmanuel Onyuche, policy analyst with Nextia Power, and I'm going to open the event. Before I go further, just a few housekeeping rules for your conveniences. To your left-hand side, just go over there. If you have any question, you can meet me or any of the ladies behind. So once again, welcome to the 85th edition of the Power Dialogue. And we will be speaking on the topic Nigerian energy transition, reforms and implementation. Well, the issue of climate change has long become a global affair in the world, and Nigeria is not left out. And sometime last year, in response to the call for environmental friendly practices, the former government launched the Energy Transition Plan, and it was launched to mitigate two problems. I think to solve the energy poverty problem and as well as mitigate any climate mishap that the country might encounter, as well as achieving the 2060 net zero goal. So today, we'll be looking at some of the challenges in achieving 100% energy access, as well as net zero emission by 2060. We'll be looking at the private sector's role in achieving the energy transition plan, and as well as policies, regulatory instruments to ensure the continuity of this plan, even now that a new government has come to play. So, anchoring this section is no other person but a climate and energy specialist with extensive experience and expertise in sub-Saharan Africa's energy access market, with specialty in off-grid and interconnected grid electrification. His expertise includes policy and regulatory reform, political economy, market analysis and development, energy access finance, donor program management, rural economies, demand stimulation, and technical assistance. Please, with a round hand of applause, please help me make welcome Chibuikem Agboebu.
Good evening. For the four main objectives that we are looking to discuss on the panel session today. The first one is to highlight the actions taken in the implementation of the Energy Transition Plan. As you're aware, in 2021, the government announced Nigeria's Energy Transition Plan that looks to attain net zero by 2060 through different pathways and across multiple sectors. So we'll highlight the actions that have been taken so far. We will discuss and present the challenges in achieving the target set in the ETP and Nigeria's overall climate commitment. We'll also discuss the role of the private sector in achieving the Nigeria's energy transition and opportunities for local and foreign investors. And we'll discuss of the policies and regulatory instruments that are existing and how they can those can be used to transform the landscape. Without further ado, I have a rich array of panelists here, and I'll just start by introducing them. I'll first of all like to introduce Charles Majomi. Please, Charles, can you just join us at the... Please, a round of applause for Charles while I read out his profile. Charles Majomi is currently a partner in gas and energy transition at the Next Year Group. He's a seasoned energy sector specialist with almost 2 decades of experience. His expertise spans across policy formulation, political economy analysis, risk assessment and management, fiscal and governance reform, business development, stakeholder engagement, and designing and implementing media and civil society advocacy strategies. Charles has held senior positions in both the private and development sectors of the gas industry, both domestically and with foreign groups. He's particularly focused on developing practical domestic gas-based industries on the African continent to enhance local jobs creation and cleaner, safer cooking practices while diminishing global warming through the monetization of gas flares. As a consultant, he has advised the Nigerian presidency and all other branches of the Nigerian government while leading the gas workstream at the Facility for Oil Sector Transformation, FOSTA, for FCDO. Charles advised the Nigerian National Assembly on the gas elements of the Petroleum Industrial Bill. Charles is fluent in several languages. He continues to be a leading public commentator on energy industry issues within Nigeria. He's currently very much involved in developing an implementable energy transition strategy to pivot Nigeria towards a net zero focus and the role gas would play in this strategy. Nice to have you, Charles. Really, really nice, because I have lots of questions. I'm thinking about questions I would ask you from your profile. Next, I would like to invite Jennifer Ifanyo Okoro. Jennifer, please, can you join us? Please, a round of applause for Jennifer. Jennifer is currently Song King's Vice President on Public Policy. As an energy lawyer with nearly 2 decades of experience in the power sectors of emerging markets, she has provided legal, policy, regulatory, transaction advisory, and program management support to international donor agencies, energy regulators, policymakers, local financial institutions, power project developers, and electric utilities. Welcome and nice to have you, Jennifer. And last but not least, also like to invite Zira John Kwage. Zira, please. Round of applause for Zira, please. Zira is an economic researcher with expertise in energy and climate policy. He is the Nigerian focal person for the African Climate Foundation and the Nigeria advisor at the Climate Emergency Collaboration Group. As an experienced energy analyst with over 10 years of experience in the energy sector, he has provided public reforms and program management support to several international organizations across the globe. Nice to have you, Zira. So great. I'm going to just dive right into it, and Charles, I'll start with you in that order. So you're very familiar about the ETP. You're also familiar about the Climate Change Act that was also passed and the establishment of the NCCC. And so all the developments across the energy transition landscape over the past years. And so can you just speak a bit more to that in terms of giving an overview of Nigeria's energy transition landscape, with particular emphasis on the role of natural gas within the whole energy transition towards net zero?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So the Nigerian Energy Transition Plan is an ambitious one, and I think I'm not overstating or understating the issue by saying that. It seeks to significantly reduce carbon and methane emissions in line with what we call nationally determined contributions, which reflects our commitment to the Paris Treaty, to which the former president committed this country in 2015. The role of gas is envisaged as what we call a transition fuel, and it is given that nomenclature because it is actually the one that we have in abundance. It's the lowest hanging fruit. We produce associated gas, which is gas that is, actually I would say about 60% of our gas production is associated gas, which is gas that is mainly produced during the course of looking for crude oil. We have 200 trillion cubic feet of gas. We are dependent currently on gas-fired thermal power stations. We also export significant quantities of gas to foreign markets through our NLNG program. In fact, we export about 14% of LNG gas into the EU, which is our main customer. So certainly, it wouldn't make any sense on the trajectory towards renewable energies and cleaner energy forms to entirely jettison gas as an enabler, such that along the process towards the transition, this can be a placeholder that will maintain our energy security needs while we transit to more renewable and cleaner energies such as solar, wind, power, etc. Did you ask me what the challenge? What did you ask? What else did you ask me?
So basically, give you the landscape of, like based on your insights of the energy transition landscape, particularly the role of gas within that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So currently, if you look at the policy emissions from the sector, what we have is the steer from the Policy Advisory Subcommittee, which actually deals with energy. And that we will ahead, increasing our supply. That means developing our non-associated gas assets, developing our infrastructure, and optimizing the infrastructure we have currently through interventions such as the Gas Network Code, which seeks to have multiple users for infrastructure. In other words, third parties can transit it. And I think also through developing the conditions for doing so by taking a look at the regulatory space. One particular enabler, or I should say, one particular constraint to our gas development has been the pricing of natural gas in the domestic economy. Now, gas is what we call a quasi-regulated energy source currently, as it's going to the domestic economy. Gas that is destined for the strategic sector or for the power sector are sold at deregulated rates into the industry. The energy producers have said that this is not viable, as they're actually being forced through their domestic delivery obligation to sell gas below the cost of production. In my view, unless a willing buyer, willing seller construct is in place immediately, we certainly will not be able to take full advantage of gas as an energy transition fuel and have the positive impacts that it would have on our national economy. The other issue is the power sector. There is considerable amount of debt buildup in the power sector as a result of GenCos not paying this one, the DISCOs not doing. And that has constrained the development of non-associated and associated gas assets because the power sector is the main off-taker of our gas. The other issue I would like to talk about is host communities. And I think the Petroleum Industry Act does try to address that. A lot of our gas reserves, especially our associated gas, is actually located in potentially explosive regions of Nigeria, Niger Delta, etc. And while we have had some relative peace, I think for a lasting solution to be had, we really do have to address the host community issues in a meaningful way so that security is attained in those areas, so that investors can go to site and develop. The last thing I will talk about is our gas exports, because the Policy Advisory Committee have stated that they're going to go full steam ahead with exports, full steam ahead with everything, which I believe is good, because if you look at the trajectory as far as the energy transition, the global energy transition plan is concerned, it does predict that by 2060, you will see a significant fall in demand for natural gas as more renewable energies come on stream and displace them. What we're already seeing, however, which is not well known, is that the European, and I'll take the EU for example, what we're seeing for the first time are carbon taxes that are being imposed on LNG cargoes that are coming into the EU from jurisdictions where there is lack of effective mitigation of methane and carbon. In other words, they have these cargoes, if they are of high carbon or methane intensity, they intend to tax them beyond commerciability. They say that this is to protect the renewable energy market, but it's also to protect their own market. So we have to start. So what does that portend for the gas energy transition trajectory? What it says is that by the year 2040, our portfolio of gas utilization will significantly recalibrate. It means that as the markets abroad dry up, we will have to focus on the domestic markets. So it brings to focus the need to concentrate on all those items that I've mentioned if we're going to succeed. The last point I will make is that, and I promise it is the last point I'll make, is that the energy transition plan and the gas expansion plan are often at odds. And for us to be able to have a very sincere conversation about where we're going with respect to energy transition, we have to understand what the impact of our greatest achievements will be on climate change, and what the consequences for climate change abuse, if I may use that word, going forward. And I've mentioned the LNG thing. What will happen to us going forward, and what will happen to our gas industry? Financing for gas has become an issue primarily because we have focused, because of the energy transition plan. Banking institutions all over the world are no longer investing, either through finance or investment capital, into fossil fuel projects. So there is a myriad of challenges facing us if we're going to actually be able to effectively transit using gas, while at the same time maintaining our energy transition targets.
Thank you very much, Charles. Very insightful. Jennifer, I would come back to you, over to you, and I'm going to flip it and look at the other part of the coin, renewables, primarily solar, which seems to be like the shining bright within the whole energy transition equation right now. And so there's been a lot of from the Paris agreements to COP26 to the whole energy landscape. There's been a lot of focus around renewables, ramping up renewables, and transitioning towards full net zero, where renewables are powering the economy. And in Nigeria, there's been a lot of efforts by donors, philanthropists, the government, market support institutions around the role of renewables, primarily solar, in this transition. So given the work you've done over the few years, particularly within the context of the energy transition, can you speak to some of the strategies that have been taken to amplify the role of renewables, particularly solar, within the energy transition?
Thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me. So I think to answer your question, if I could speak from the perspective of an off-grid solar company, I may touch on grid, but I do work for Sun King, which is an off-grid solar company. Sun King provides solar home solutions across Nigeria. So a few of the strategies I think that Sun King has embarked on, one is just expansion, just sheer expansion. We have 250 branches in 28 states in the country. Our target is to really carry as many people along the path to net zero as possible. And so one of the ways that we're looking, to doing that is really just reaching as many people as possible and providing as much energy access as possible. I think a second strategy that we've adopted is social inclusion. We have over 15,000 sales agents in the country, and almost half of them, 50% of them, are women. And this is not a marketing pitch. My first week at Sun King, during orientation, I had this mandatory field exercise where I actually have to go into the field and witness solar installations. And these are rural communities. Like, we couldn't even access the location by our car. We had to park our car somewhere and then walk like a long way before we got to these houses. And the funny thing is, the agents who were doing the installations were women. These were women with their ladders, climbing the roofs, you know, with their nuts and bolts, cranking away. And I was absolutely impressed. So I think for us, part of our strategy is to carry as many people along the energy transition path to net zero, and that does include women and the poor. I think also there are a number of financial strategies that Sun King has also embarked on, and you know, many companies like ours. I think first, because the customer demographic profile that we target is really the poor, one of the things that we've done to reach as many people as possible is to make our products affordable through payment plans. Payment products, the upfront capital cost may be too high for our customers. So in order to ensure affordability, we've broken them up into payment plans. Again, that is a strategy that we use to connect as many people as possible. Another financial strategy is participating in a number of results-based financing programs. So I think many of you might be familiar with the Nigerian electrification project, NEP, which was a $550 million fund implemented or funded by the World Bank and the AFDB, and it was implemented by the REA. There are a number of other results-based financing programs like this. We're also participating in the CISO program in Togo, which is another similar program. There's also another program upcoming in Uganda. But just to really demonstrate the impact of what programs like NEP can have on the sector, Sun King alone, in last year, we deployed 10 megawatts of solar power. And why that number is staggering, why it should hit home, is because last year there was no 10 megawatt solar plant in the country, period. The first 10 megawatt solar plant was finally commissioned, I think January or February of this year. That was a solar plant in Kano, and it was a federal government funded project. Under the NEP program as a whole, 52 megawatts of solar power was deployed. Again, there's no 52 megawatt solar plant in the country. So while you have 14 solar IPPs, a lot of, you know, the utility scale IPPs, they've been in development now for, I would say, close to a decade, at least since 2015, 2016. And not to in any way disparage utility scale solar. I do think that we need it, but I really just want to sort of emphasize the impact that results-based financing programs can have. Those projects range in anywhere from 50 megawatts to 100 megawatts, and not one has reached financial close. And they've been in development for close to 10 years. So while they are negotiating power purchase agreements and put call option agreements and sovereign guarantees and EPC contracts and PPAs, little off-grid solar companies like us are quickly chugging away in the background, deploying 52 megawatts. So again, just to demonstrate the impact that these programs can have. And then I think another financial strategy is really just to, you know, come up with innovative financing schemes. So a couple of months ago, Sun King, for example, closed a $130 million securitization deal with a group of international financial institutional players, such as Citigroup, Standard Bank, just to name a few. But we need more innovative financial schemes like this. Because of that securitization deal, it freed up more capital for us so that we could then invest more into a lot of the rural areas that we work in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Zia, I'm going to come over to you, and you wear the broader climate hat here. And I think sometimes when we talk about energy transition or net zero goals, we tend to focus a lot more on energy, but energy is just a segment of the broader climate market. So just from your work within the ACF and within the global climate group, just can you speak a bit around your insights within how that the Nigeria's net limit angle? Yeah.
very much. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Electricity Hub for the kind invitation. So speaking on the broader climate goals and how energy transition fits in, I think it's important to follow on what Charles mentioned, which is that the energy transition plan and the net zero plan that we have in Nigeria is quite ambitious. But the fact that it's ambitious doesn't mean that it's impossible to attain. I like to think of myself as an optimist, and I think it is entirely feasible, but it will depend on two key factors, in my view. The first factor is the political commitment to implementation in the long term, and then the second factor is the accountability mechanisms around the plan itself. So, on the political commitment, given that this is a multi-decade plan, we should expect that there will be internal and external shocks that will affect the pace of implementation. We've already seen two in the past 2 years with the outbreak of COVID and the Russia-Ukraine war. Those are two external factors that affected the pace of implementation domestically, and this is bound to continue happening. So the quality of, I guess, the commitment from policymakers in the long term determine if we shift or change course in the journey to net zero. Then the second point on accountability mechanisms is also important. And when I talk about accountability, I'm not just talking about civil society organizations calling out the government. I'm referring more to constructive discussions with policymakers, government officials to identify the best pathways towards achieving net zero. The net zero plan is really just a plan. What will determine how it's executed is the pathways that we choose and the types of milestones that we set to ensure that we are on track. So finally, I'll just say that there are 90 countries globally with net zero plans, Nigeria being one of them. Out of those 90, there was a recent report by the World Resources Institute that only 5 of those countries are actually on track towards achieving their net zero plans. Those 5 countries are France, Denmark, Chile, Costa Rica, and South Africa. So Nigeria is not one of those 5, unfortunately. But it means that we're not alone. So a lot of countries are struggling to align, their fiscal planning, budgeting process, many other things towards net zero because it's an economy-wide transition plan. So I'll stop here for now.
Thank you very much, Zira. Back to you, Charles. Now, when you were, and please, I would like to keep it within maybe 4 to 5 minutes, just so I can go around to the round of questions for everyone. But when you were speaking, you spoke a lot about what Nigeria has is huge gas reserves. It's a gas market. We have gas reserve. That's number one. And then you also mentioned, and then within the framework of the ETP, gas is a transition fuel.
Correct.
Also mentioned things around the evolving landscape within the gas market, and at some point we need to develop the gas infrastructure to supply our domestic market. So my question would be, in this case, looking at Nigeria's gas reserves, and we are looking at transition between now and I think 2030 or 2035 to transition using gas. Are we going to be able to fully exhaust our reserves by then? No. And number two, if not, then do you really think of gas as playing just a transition role, or do you see it playing a role within any transition beyond just transitioning? Because then it's net zero.
Okay.
So yeah.
So first of all, we're sitting on 200 trillion cubic feet of proven natural gas reserves. This makes us the 9th largest gas country in the world. I don't think there is any possibility that at the rate at which we're going to go anywhere near exhausting those reserves. What was your question again?
So I'm looking at, with this potential, is it fair to say gas is just transitioning of certain renewables if we have this large
there was a second part, your second part of your question. You asked me about the reserve.
Yeah. So looking at the evolving global landscape and the domestic market for gas, also considering, our industrialization plan, all the gas will play towards that. So Is it fair to say the role of gas is just with regards to transitioning to renewables, or is there a much bigger role for gas within the energy transition?
Well, I think they're related. I mean, the sense that we have the reserves to do pretty much anything we want to do in gas. One of the significant failings of our gas story so far has been that we have refused to accept the fact that adding value to local resources like gas is actually the seed that actually creates the multiplier economic effect that produces jobs, that enhances socio-economic welfare, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. In failing to do that, we have been an export-driven country, all right, and have frankly lost the opportunity to leverage gas as its primary resource, as our most important resource. That being said, what we're seeing today now is a gradual recognition of industries such as compressed natural gas industry, which can actually develop. And I believe that very recently the president gave an approval for a program in CNG. We've been able to see developments in the monetization of gas flares, even though we haven't delivered on expiring them. There is a pathway to doing so, which can spur industries such as LPG, which is important for cooking gas. One of the key elements of the ETP is the transition away from dirty cooking fuels such as kerosene and firewood. I should say that which are responsible for high rates of female mortality, and also waste a lot of people's time. If you have to go looking for wood for 6 or 7 hours of the day, you're exposing yourself to dangers. You're also being taken away from productive activities that could enhance your family. So, and of course, desertification. As you clear these areas, the desertification. If you're cooking with kerosene, we have the highest mortality rate for women dying from noxious fuels from kerosene. So the uses of gas go well beyond our exports. They have very, very tangible socioeconomic values. So in my view, I think gas will continue to be productively used domestically far longer than it will be used as an export resource.
Okay, great. Jennifer, over to you. Now, there's been so much investment and the focus within the solar, particularly the off-grid solar subsegment of the renewables market as well. You mentioned the NEP program. You mentioned some of this financing that Sonoking has been able to raise. There's like an increasing number of development and philanthropy investment in the sector. However, we are not where we want to be with regards to our target for renewables. We're nowhere close. So, what are some of the challenges really causing this?
Thank you. And I think on this topic, I'll probably speak a little more broadly, so it's not specifically off-grid focused, but there are a number of challenges I think that we have to scale. I think the first challenge is policy inconsistencies, and it's not just with regard to the renewable sector. Honestly, it's policy inconsistencies within the entire power sector and the value chain. And I'll give you an example. So last year, April 2022, the Energy Commission of Nigeria, they launched Nigeria's Energy Master Plan. And in the Energy Master Plan, one of the policy objectives is to resuscitate Nigeria's coal industry and build up our coal reserves. And then a year later, Nigeria releases its energy transition plan, and it's talking about to transition to net zero. So on the surface, those two contradict themselves. And again, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with us utilizing our natural resources as transition fuels. I'm not saying that, but I am saying though that this does create confusion in the mind of an investor who is looking at investing in Nigeria's renewable energy sector and taking it seriously. Secondly, I think transmission is a significant bottleneck, not for the off-grid space, but for utility scale solar, and in fact, for any IPP, transmission is a bottleneck. I don't know. I don't know exactly how we solve that. There are a lot of different ideas, but I'm just identifying that as a challenge, which I think all of us in this room know. I think aside from transmission, there's also financing. I think in the energy transition plan, it's estimated that I think 1.8 or 1.9 trillion is needed in order for us to get to net zero 2060. That's a lot of money. I mean, there are a few solutions. I think I mentioned some of the financing, mechanisms and unique financial plans that are on board. I also think that now that Nigeria has removed the fuel subsidy, this may be a good opportunity to reapply those subsidies to the renewable sector. So you might disagree, but again, this is just a suggestion. I think other things that perhaps we could do is, implement fiscal incentives, making it either giving tax waivers or, import duty waivers so that companies can bring in solar products. And so anyway, these are just a few suggestions. But I think the last challenge for me, which is probably, in my personal opinion, the most difficult challenge to scale, is sheer poverty. And I say this because, so you remember, I don't know if you guys know Abraham Maslow, but he was the one who developed the, pyramid of need exactly. And you have these 5 levels. I won't go through all of them, but at the very base, at the bottom, you have, and this pyramid, by the way, explains human behavior, human beings. And at the very bottom of that pyramid, you have your physiological needs: water, shelter, clothing, food, air. And then as you go up a level, you have, safety, you go up a level, you have love, et cetera, et cetera. At the very top is self-actualization, which is when you essentially achieve your highest goals, you fulfill your life's purpose or your mission. I see net zero and the energy transition in general. When I look at Nigeria's hierarchy of needs, I see decarbonization, net zero, all that good stuff at the very top. In my opinion, we cannot scale to the very top unless we provide the average Nigerian with his basic physical needs. If you go home tonight, ask your gates man, do you know about decarbonization? Probably not. I guarantee you, you'll hear nothing but crickets. Talk to the keke driver, ask him about the path to net zero, whether he knows about it, probably not. Ask the woman with the baby on her back selling granules on the street whether she knows about net zero, probably not. Until and unless we use the energy transition to solve and rectify Nigerians' basic needs, food, shelter, clothing, I think net zero will continue to elude us for the foreseeable future. We have to find a way to make it resonate with the average Nigerian. We have to find a way to make it applicable and relatable to solve their most pressing, urgent challenges. So for me, poverty is the most significant challenge.
Very deep, very deep. Thanks, Jennifer. I think that's very enlightening. Zero, back to you. You mentioned something very interesting. 90 countries with net zero plans, only 5 are on track. And I mean, I would assume if you look at what some of the key issues regarding that would be, a key area would be finance. And I think one of the key drivers within energy transition or climate has been climate finance, carbon credits and all of that as well. So my question to you really is around the issue of the climate finance market. And what are the strategies, or what are how can funding or climate financing be used to develop and implement actionable projects to support Nigeria's climate and energy transition?
Thank you, Chibukem. So given that I work for a climate donor, not a financier, I think I'll speak more from the philanthropy point of view. So I think philanthropy has important roles to play in supporting the government in its in the implementation of the net zero pledge or net zero plan. And I would describe it in 3 main buckets. So in terms of policy, finance, and in terms of communications that Jennifer already highlighted. So under policy, there is need to take that from the national level where it is and spread it around both vertically and horizontally. So vertically to different levels of government. If we have it, will be limited in terms of reach and not decentralized into the state, and in some cases even bear in mind that states, take about, I think, half of or they spend about half of our government revenue. So it's important to tap into that. By spreading it horizontally, I mean across sectors, because climate change is a cross-sectoral challenge, from agriculture to transport to power generation. We talked about a lot, to forestry and whatnot. So we need to take that plan and ask ourselves, what does it mean for this sector, and what is this sectoral plan that ties into the broader national plan? And I think that's a role that philanthropy can play. Then on finance, donor money is not as large as what banks can provide or international financial institutions can provide, but I think it can be catalytic. So there are demonstration projects that philanthropic money has been used for, that has then translated into bigger projects, and allowing solar companies to obtain finance, or other forms of larger scale finance. I think still on the financing, philanthropy can help to align budgetary and fiscal planning with climate priorities. So we can't have a national budget that prioritizes areas that are, or like energy sources, for example, that are out of the net zero plan. It doesn't mean that projects like gas or other types of resources will not be supported, but in a manner that aligns with the plan.
Okay.
Then finally, on communication, I think Jennifer already mentioned it, so I won't speak too much on this, but I think there is a need to improve the quality of public discourse on climate change in Nigeria. I think that's absolutely essential. And in doing so, if we can make it politically relevant, so if people care about climate, they'll most likely vote for people that care about climate, and then it translates into greater policy commitment towards climate. I think that's something that philanthropy can definitely support with. Yeah, so I'll stop here for now.
All right, thanks a lot, Zira. So I'm just going to ask the last round of questions, really, and I'll get back to you, Charles. I think Jennifer had mentioned something about using the subsidies and telling them the savings for the subsidies for renewable energy, but you didn't seem to agree. And so perhaps to you would be, if you were to advise the new government, for example, around the role of gas, what would be the top three, actionable steps you think that the government needs to take with regards to energy transition and natural gas here?
Okay, well, the first thing I would tell government is to get serious about it. We've been talking about gas development in this country since the time of the Associated Gas Reinjection Act of 1979. We've been talking about putting out gas flares for over 40 years, 50 years even, close to 50 years. But yet, we haven't been able to move the needle significantly.
Okay.
Our policies have been conflicting, they've been confusing. The fiscal incentives and the regulatory frameworks that we've put in have been completely not fit for purpose. Foreign investment has dried up, and now we find ourselves at a time when the industry is transforming and the global geopolitical conditions for gas development in the long term are significantly diminished. I would also tell them that they have to understand that the approach towards developing gas projects has to change. There's one thing to say that you want to develop 10 offshore non-associated gas assets, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, we're going to regulatory reform. But if there's no money to do it, and you don't understand how to get the money, then you're just talking, and government doesn't have the money. Let's be very frank with ourselves. Now we're looking at mitigation as directly tied to finance. Yeah. Carbon credit offsets, carbon emissions trades, All of these things are new dynamics that have come into the industry. New abatement technologies are also in the industry, which are cost positive. So mandating an LNG producer to have a carbon capture and storage system with their thing requires policies. But in addressing that issue of demethanization and decarbonizing your cargoes, you're stimulating the possibility for investment, because these are the new conditions precedent to investment. We don't seem to understand that. We seem to be just continuing on as if business is as usual. It is not. It requires significant retraining of our key decision makers in the industry. Okay, it requires technocrats, not political appointees, in those key positions. It requires government will. It requires a broad embrace with the international financial community. It requires work and will. And frankly speaking, I don't see that at this present time. So I am very worried for our aspirations to develop our gas business both internationally and domestically.
Thank you very much, Charles. Jennifer, my last question for you, and this really just comes off the back of one of the key critical issues that you mentioned, poverty, and so from what I get from that, there's a real need towards integrating our net zero plans or commitments into the economic and development framework, really there. And so probably just asking you what the two key areas, what are two strategies you think that can be implemented towards doing that? How do we mainstream our net zero goals towards our economic and national development?
I might give a few more, maybe 4, but I'll try to be quick.
in about 4 minutes max. Yeah.
Okay. So I think the first is, we really do need more financial institutions, and possibly, and when I say local, I mean local financial institutions, aside from the mainstays of the African Development Bank and the World Bank. And I mention this because, when I look at, for example, the history of the mortgage industry in the US and how it just blew up, it was because you had the creation of mortgage banks, financial institutions that were set up specifically to fund real estate projects. When I look at, how the IT sector, for example, blew up, it's because you had the creation of, tech banks, or, such as the like of Silicon Valley and another Silicon Valley Bank and other banks, financial institutions that were set up to essentially fund tech startups. Now, for example, in the US, you have a number of green banks that are propping up. And these, again, are financial institutions created specifically to fund renewable energy projects. So I think that that's one way. We definitely need to look at creating financial institutions fit for purpose, just, for that. I think another strategy is, now, for example, with the passage of the Electricity Act, a lot of states are keen to participate. I really do think this is a great opportunity for state-led PPPs, state governments partnering with private companies to develop renewable energy infrastructure, or, just projects in general. Another type of partnership that I would really like to see more of, and I think you sort of alluded to this when you were talking about host communities, we need more community when you have a community that is a stakeholder, I can guarantee you that it will reduce vandalism. It will probably reduce electricity theft. So I would really love to see more partnerships between community-led cooperatives and private companies. And I think two quick ones lastly. One is I encourage more people to really take a critical look at the supply chains and see how we can explore and potentially identify more opportunities for local manufacturing, or at least assembly of some of these panels, whatever it is. Because I do think that if we do that, we reduce our reliance on imports and possibly, ease some of the pressure that's now on foreign currency. That's just my opinion. And then lastly, we have so many private elementary schools, so many private universities. I would really love to see private-led renewable energy technical and training institutions. I think that one of the reasons why South Africa, I think, has been a little bit reluctant or hasn't, part of the concerns that they've expressed is what do we do with all of the jobs? And one, what about the capacity building? If you want us to embark on this transition, we need training. I think that the same applies here. So I would really like to see a lot more private-led, renewable energy training institutions to really develop and nurture the next wave of brilliant minds in this sector. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And then Zira, back to you and my final question. And this is more climate broadly, broader within the whole climate angle. Can you speak to some of the key policy instruments that we need in Nigeria towards achieving our energy transition goal?
Thanks. So before I speak about what we need, I think it's important to talk about what we already have.
Yeah.
So we have several policy and regulatory instruments in place. Like Charles mentioned, some of them actually are at odds with each other.
Conflict, yeah.
So the first step, I think, is before we start creating new ones, let's look at what we have. Where do they align? Where are they at odds? And how can we bring them into a single climate or energy transition framework that has buy-in across all levels of government? Because ECN has their own plan, NERC or Ministry of Power has their own plan. It makes it more difficult to implement anything moving forward. And secondly, on the regulatory side, I think it is important for us to communicate the science of climate change better to policymakers. Because right now, I get the sense that climate change or energy transition is a bit ideological.
Okay.
In the run-up to the last election, we're having conversations about some circles of policymakers that don't necessarily believe in climate change, or people that are still working towards coal development in 2023. All these ideas are because there is no sound, agreeable understanding on the science of climate change and the opportunities that it brings for Nigeria, opportunities and challenges that it brings. So I think that needs to be communicated better. Then I mentioned earlier that there are 90 countries that have net zero plans. Nigeria is now part of the net zero club. That means that there are several other countries that are on this journey. And some countries have had net zero plans for the past 5 years, some even more. So there are lessons that we can pick from those countries that have gone further along in the journey so that we don't make the same mistakes. And that's why I think lesson sharing is really important for us to expose our business leaders, decision makers, to see what is going on in other countries, how they've managed to manage the challenges and the opportunities around climate change and energy transition, and then bring those lessons back home. And I'll just close by emphasizing a point that I made earlier about pathways. So I can't sit here and list out all the regulations or policy instruments that will be needed, because there are many ways to skin a cat. We have to go, but there are hundreds of ways or pathways we can use to get there. What we need is to identify economically and politically viable pathways, because there are pathways that make sense technically, but it doesn't make sense politically, or it doesn't make sense economically based on our financial situation. So we need to understand the politics and the economics behind what we propose to government, and then give them the best support. Think tanks like Next Year, there's so many organizations, even represented here, that can provide good advice on politically and economically viable pathways. I think that's what we focus on, and not just naming the instruments that will be needed.
Thank you. Zira, just quickly, just hang in there. You mentioned about politicians and political leaders around, who are promoting fossil fuel. One will argue, from the results of the Russia-Ukraine war, you saw a lot of Western companies who are champions of renewable energy. For example, going back to their coal plants and natural gas. So within the concept of Nigeria's energy independence, for example, and not being susceptible to other to the global energy market dynamics, that since these Western countries who are champions of clean energy are going back to coal, then why should Nigeria? So what would you say to that?
It's a good point. But I think the bigger lesson here is that energy security is really critical to any country. So when you think about climate change as an independent, altruistic ambition, it's very hard to push the agenda. But if you think about it from the lens of energy or economic security, then it resonates a lot better. Now, with the countries that you mentioned, some of the countries that went back to their coal power plants, there's an interesting example of the Nord Stream pipeline. There have been advocates working or campaigning against the pipeline for, I don't know, 10 years. 2 weeks after Russia invaded Ukraine, that pipeline was cancelled. So just compare the work of 10 years of advocates and 2 weeks of a geopolitical event. So it just tells you that geopolitics and energy security takes precedence, and rightly so in most cases. What we as energy people or climate people need to do is see where the energy priorities, the energy security priorities, the geopolitical priorities align with climate goals, and then we find that sweet spot.
Okay.
It increases our chances of success, I think.
Great. Thank you very much, Jerry. And thank you so much to all my wonderful panelists. I think at this point I would open up questions to the floor. So please, if you have questions, you can just raise your hand. Just start by your name, your organization, which are the panelists you're directing the questions to, and then ask the questions. You have 2 hands here in front. Are there any microphones? Any microphones? Okay.
Good evening, all. My name is Engineer Umar Adam.
Okay.
My name is Engineer Umar Adam from NDPHC. I have 2 questions. One on gas. You made mention that decarbonization by using carbon capture. So I want to know, we have transition plan in place, which approved already. I want to know if in the transition plan they included carbon capture, because presently 75% of our power generation is coming from gas, which definitely is opposing climate change. And to reduce the emission of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases from our power plants, we need to implement that technology you mentioned. That is a carbon capture in all our gas-fired power plants, so that reduce the emission. And by doing that, definitely we are going to get carbon credit from those power plants. That is number one. I want to know if the carbon capture is included in the transition plan. My second question, can I go ahead?
Sure.
Goes to my sister. Okay. I have a concern on data, because it's a key to track our progress. You made mention that presently we deployed 52 megawatts of solar home system, which is good to our country. Even though I want to know your source. Okay. Yes. So aside solar home system, how many mini grid we developed in Nigeria and the total capacity? I know years back, is it last year, GIZ in collaboration with the Ministry of Power through C for All launched C for All, latest version of C for All software, which I happen to be there. They are, at that time, they were still gathering data. They haven't finished. So I want to know if they are able to finish gathering the whole mini grid we have in Nigeria,
Okay.
so that for us to know the capacity. And again, if we say renewable energy, we are mostly focusing on solar. What of hydro? What is our plan on small hydros? What is the total capacity of small hydros we have? And what is our plan against 2060? We are targeting zero carbon. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll just let you answer because it was quite a lot. So I'll let you respond to that, and I can take the other questions to you, just so you don't. Yes.
Okay. So I don't recall a specific mention of a policy in the ETP with regards to carbon capture specifically. However, from what I have reviewed, the principle of abatement is very much part of the energy transition plan. And as you know, in energy value chains, there are two main principles. There's mitigation, okay, which is, for example, putting out a gas flare, which is a carbon offset, which can be traded, like you were mentioning. Then you have abatement. Abatement is really about creating a value from the lost carbon or methane types of emission, and thereby by capturing it from the system. So carbon capture absolutely will be a focus, in my view, going forward of this government. Why do I say that? Because, and this is separate and aside from the ETP, because if you read the policy advisory statement from the Policy Advisory Council, the subcommittee on energy, it specifically, and I was very happy to see that, mentioned the use of carbon capture with new LNG projects. So I don't think it would be hard to extrapolate and to actually, if there is a policy supported, I think that could work very easily in power. I should also say that in addition to carbon capture, there are other cost-positive abatement implementations that can actually be undertaken. What does cost-positive mean? And this is not widely understood by the industry. It means that the cost of investing in that abatement will be paid back because you are able to improve the efficiency of the plant. You're able to capture wasted gases that can then be monetized. And I think it's really the in the system, us, Zera and all such, to really focus on this, what I said before, this evolving landscape when it comes to decarbonizing the energy value chain, because it's not all bad news. It actually can be cost positive. It can be good news. It's a new investment grade activity. And so I'm fully in support of it as a policy.
So if I may, and maybe I should have clarified. So the 52 megawatts of solar that was the 52 megawatts of solar PV capacity deployed wasn't just the solar home system companies. It was the solar home system companies as well as the mini grid developer. So it was everything that was realized under NEP. And in terms of the source of my data, so it's actually REA. So the Rural Electrification Agency, on their website, they actually have a map where they've done a really fascinating job of aggregating all this information together. You can see how many mini grids there are in the country, where the solar home systems were deployed. That 52 megawatts came from that website. In terms of the number of mini grids, I actually thought the last information I had was that there were 82 mini grids. But then today I saw this big flashing number on LinkedIn where REA announced that they hit 100 plus milestone. So now there are over 100 mini grids. I think 30 something of them have been completed. They are on the ground generating power. I think the rest of them are still in construction. So all of my figures came from REA.
Thank you. I think, yes. So we'll take your question. We'll take, there's a hand there as well, so we can take both questions at the same time for the panelists.
Good evening, all. Yeah, mine is a question and a comment to you. Maybe my name is Modibo. I'm a civil servant in the power sector.
Okay.
So my issue is we are getting one side of the coin.
Okay.
In the discussion. We are not getting the other. I think the panel should be completed with maybe a team member from the ETP, national
ETO
member, because now all of you are accusing the government.
No.
Sorry for using the hashtag.
No, please. I take exception to that. No. No.
Okay, not all. Most of the comments we are getting is from the private sector, from the donor, from nobody is defending the government of this is the action plan, this is what we are doing, this is it. So part of his question too, if to say there is a government you need to complete the panel.
Okay.
That is one. The question now I have is more on the gas because my career is all in the power sector. What is the logic? I keep asking, but I couldn't get it. On gas, 75% of or 80% of our power generation is from natural gas, other things. We explore the gas in Nigeria. We utilize it here. We sell the products locally. But we buy what you said is there is a subsidy that even below the cost price of production. Why don't we just sell the gas to the power gencos in Naira? Why are we pricing it in dollar? Because it is affecting the tariffs. Because once your raw material, you buy it in dollar, you sell your product in Naira. So with this FX fluctuation, you find it very difficult to even reduce the poverty you are talking about. It's only when the tariff is very low or affordable that electricity will be available to the rural communities, and the ripple effect, what you said, the ripple effect economically will be felt everywhere. So the hierarchy, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy, will move to the next grade. So I believe maybe next time, and maybe I will need explanation.
Okay. Let's just take the question from the gentleman behind.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ad Kamaldeen. I work with Connexa, and I lead our decentralized energy business. And my first question is directed to Charles. You were asked around if you were to advise the current government on gas, what will they do? And I completely agree with you on the points that you raised, primarily that they should be serious about it. But speaking specifically, right, because there's a lot of challenges with gas supply and the power sector. What would you suggest they do to securitize gas for our generation plants? Because at the moment, you have a lot of generation plants that are not able to secure gas supply because of either the fact that they're not necessarily able to buy the gas at competitive prices that other people, both externally and internally, are willing to buy for it, and the fact that there's even a limited amount of gas supply in the market to go with. So how can we start to securitize gas supply for our generation that make up the largest portion of our generation capacity on the grid? The second question is more of a general one for the entire panel. There's been a lot of buzz around renewables, clean. But we shouldn't forget that this is one of the most costly sources of energy at the moment, even though at the moment they're starting to become a parity to more conventional sources. So there's that viability gap. And Nigeria is a country that's currently still developing. We haven't yet necessarily fully industrialized. So to be competitive on the global stage, we need to make our production competitive. So if you're dealing with high cost of power on your production, that has an add-on effect, right? There's a lot of noise around climate justice, right? And a lot of the push that drives us to renewables is more of external pressures, not internal pressures. So how do we balance that conflict in? There's a push for renewables, but the supporting infrastructure for climate justice is not necessarily being done. That's my two questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Maybe Charles, I'll let you start.
Okay, which one?
Yes, please, and maybe the last one. I'll pass that to Zira about climate justice. Yeah. Sure.
Oh, please. Do.
Okay. I have a point to make, as you know.
Yeah. About the Naira thing. Do we produce gas in Naira? We produce gas in dollars. Something just happened.
Yeah, something. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
As soon as I said that, it just you see, it's the age-old question. Look, I would agree with you. If the Naira was a very stable currency,
yeah,
people would be running in here. I mean, I remember when I was a child, the Naira was actually stronger than the dollar.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you look at the exchange rate locally, or if you could travel in time from 1980 something to where it is now, you'll be shocked to see where the naira is. So who's going to guarantee the differential? I've always been advocate for some form, I don't want to use the word subsidy, but some form of equalization. When you, in the midstream, make an investment, for example, in an LPG recovery plant, and you're selling propane or LPG or any of the calorifics to the local market, you do so in naira. And one of the big issues we've always had is, how do you justify amortization of a hard currency investment when you have such a fluctuation in currency things? So if we're going to encourage investors, and this kind of feeds to the second question from the gentleman there, if we're going to, in my view, unless you really have a very risky appetite, you're going to develop your, well, I mean, there's no other thing. You're going to develop your gas field in dollars or in some kind of hard currency, okay? So you're going to, in order to make that work, you're going to, so you want them to sell into a deregulated market with naira. That one won't work. You know what I mean? So we have to think about it from an investor's point of view. It's not a Nigerian that's going to come and do it. They're going to come with dollars. It's going to be an offshore investment company, and they want to be repaid. They're business people. So that's my answer to that. The second gentleman over there said something about the power. I think it was you, about how you guarantee power to the gas supply to the power stations. And it kind of feeds into the same issue as this gentleman mentioned. Mm-hmm. We have a problem in this country, and that is because we are compelling energy producers to sell into a regulated market, especially in the power sector and in the industrial sectors of this country. This is not a business model that is sustainable, okay? You add to, so that's why energy producers are regularly failing on their domestic delivery obligations, okay? In order to make it work, what we need to do is go beyond associated gas production. And I can't emphasize this enough. About 60% of our produced gas is produced purely by accident. This is gas that is flared, that is being re-injected for lift of crude oil wells, for crude oil production, and for own consumption. Okay. Beyond that, the gas and the methane at the flare stack is flared. Okay, because we don't have the infrastructure to connect. So to answer your question, so as oil production goes down, as gas to oil ratios dry up in the reservoirs, our associated gas production will go down commensurately. So it's extremely risky to tie our energy supply to our power through associated gas. The solution is non-associated gas production, dedicated non-associated gas fields, okay, and the infrastructure